I've never had the fortune to meet the Rainmaster, so I didn't know the Rainmaster was a princess, Xilian said. On the other side, Xuanji gritted her teeth. What did you do? Why can't I move? The Rainmaster pulled her eyes away from Pei Ming and said gently, I've brought the Yulong sword. The Yulong sword, Xilian wondered. It's the sacred guardian sword of the kingdom of Yuxi, wielded by all of its rulers through history, Huacheng replied. After the Rainmaster ascended, she forged it as a spiritual device and naturally possessed the power to stupefy the people of Yuxi. Xuanji was a traitor. Fear and guilt still consume her heart. So of course, she can do nothing but obey. The Rainmaster told her not to move, and therefore she couldn't move. Guan exclaimed, If you can't move, I'll do it myself. Then, just as he was about to stab Pei Ming again, before his blade even pierced half an inch, there was an explosion of red smoke, and clunk, the sword that pierced Pei Ming's chest disappeared. A tiny blade, no longer than a finger, fell to the ground, and Guan yelled furiously, What's going on? Why can't I move either? Xilian and the others finally stopped watching from afar and walked out. Huacheng glanced at that tiny, toy-like Mingguang sword on the ground and smirked. Much better. Let him go, Xuanji, the Rainmaster said. Xuanji's hands started to drop uncontrollably from Pei Ming's neck, but she refused to yield, her hands quivering. I won't. I already caught him. I won't let him go. If you must grab hold of something to feel better, why not pick up what you've tossed away and hold it in your hands anew, the Rainmaster said. The power of that sacred guardian sword was too strong after all, and Xuanji was forcibly yanked off, falling back to the ground, unkempt and miserable. What right do you have to discipline me? Do you really take yourself for the ruler of the kingdom? I think you've forgotten how your queenship came to be. I won't acknowledge you. I won't. The Rainmaster was silent. On the side, Banue snatched the opportunity and held out a pot, sucking Xuanji in instantly, and swiftly sealed it. And so, the source of all the mess was finally subdued. Xilian approached Pei Ming's side and helped him up. Is General Pei all right? This won't kill me, Pei Ming said. I say, Your Highness, were you all perhaps here for a while already? Xilian replied. What do you mean? Pei Ming picked up the now tiny, sealed little Mingguang sword in his hand. Crimson Rain Sword Flower, how tough is your seal? It won't just break with some pressure, will it? Of course not, Huacheng replied. Unless you hold the hilt and apply spiritual power and mentally give it permission for it to be released. Otherwise, the seal won't break by accident or by deception, no matter what. Only then did Pei Ming heave a long sigh. As for the farmers who escaped Qirong's capture, they all rushed forward. Lord Rainmaster! The ones on this side turned around. Xilian inclined his head in a bow. Queen Yuxi. The Rainmaster dismounted the black ox, rope in hand, and she also bowed her head to return the courtesy. Your Royal Highness. During this greeting, Xilian inadvertently saw her neck and was slightly taken aback, but then soon said, Back then, during Shenle's drought, that my lord would lend me your Rainmaster hat and aid me in my time of need. I was never able to thank you in person. Now, My wish has come true today." Then he bent forward and bowed deeply. The Rainmaster stood there, still, and waited until his bow was over before she replied. "I had thought, if I didn't let your Royal Highness bow out this once, my lord might never relax. Now that it's over, let us forget this affair." The tone of her voice was clear and serene, slow and calm, with a bit of a smile, looking particularly tranquil. Suddenly, a voice called out, "Hey, Pei Ming, isn't this embarrassing? Needing a woman to save you. And it's that Yu Shi Huang, no less." The Rainmaster's demeanor remained unchanged, still very at ease, but Pei Ming didn't look that comfortable anymore. Xian noticed this and quickly slapped a talisman on that little sword to seal its mouth. The ox, held by the Rainmaster, also suddenly started blowing out harsh breaths in Pei Ming's direction, shaking its head and swinging its tail. Although it wasn't aiming at Hua Cheng, Shelley knew that when bulls saw red, they'd get angry, and recalled the many painful experiences of having been chased and struck. So he quickly blocked in front of Hua Cheng, afraid that the ox would be further provoked by the red color of Hua Cheng's robes. Pei Ming had to say something at this point. Thus he scratched his nose and said politely, "Many thanks to Queen Yu Shi for rescuing little Pei." The Rainmaster was also courteous. "It's nothing." Banyue came over and tugged on the Rainmaster's sleeve. "Lord Rainmaster, Pei Su Gurgur passed out from hunger." Hua Cheng swept a look. "Let's go back up first." Banyue's problem was most effectively solved by the people of Yushi country. Since the Rainmaster ruled agriculture, food often never left their persons. Once they were back above ground, night had passed and the sun had come out. The Rainmaster instantly retrieved seeds from the satchel on the ox, found a field, and planted them on the spot. It didn't take long before a small field of crops were grown. Those who had been starving all cheered. Xielin remembered that Guzi probably hadn't eaten well in the past few days either, and woke him up. However, the first thing Guzi asked when he woke up was where his dad was, and then he thought his dad had deserted him again. He cried and sobbed for a good while, and Xielin had no choice but to give him that extremely ugly Dharma doll to hold. When Guzi heard this was his dad, it was like he was given treasure. He stopped crying, hugging it tightly as he ate. Meanwhile, Xielin, Hua Cheng, the Rainmaster, and Pei Ming stood on the side to discuss serious business. They could already see the kiln up ahead. Upon closer look, the lower half of the mountain was covered with large patches of crimson red, like that of blood, and the upper half was covered with harsh layers of snow. Xielin spoke up. Not just General Pei Jr., but Banyue, Guzi, and the others must all stay here. They can't go onward anymore. If the need arises, we might have to climb the snowy mountain. Pei Ming was dabbing medicinal smoke from a small bottle over his wounds, shaking his head as he sighed. "I've been unlucky this entire way. Hurdles after hurdles." Those words really did describe his journey thus far. Incredibly unfortunate, and he was feeling quite miserable. The Rainmaster was sitting poised next to Xielin, and after some contemplation, she said, "Your Highness, your mission this time is to subdue all the monsters and ghosts who possess the potential to become a supreme. Then there is one that you may need to watch out for." Xielin became excited. Did Lord Rainmaster run into something on the road? The Rainmaster nodded slightly. Yes. On the way here, I met a young man dressed in white. Shilian let out a soft ah and said, "The one my lord speaks of, we've also caught wind of him on the road. Many of the monsters and ghosts were afraid of him, and we almost ran into him too. Has my lord seen him in person? How did you get away?" Much ashamed, the Rainmaster said. If it wasn't for this guardian steed's astounding leg power and that young man's lack of interest in dispute, it would have been difficult to say how the meeting would have ended. What did he look like? Shilian pressed. It wasn't clear, the Rainmaster said, because his head was wrapped in bandages. Head wrapped in bandages? Shilian was dumbfounded. Was it Lang Ying? Pei Ming frowned. Your Highness knows him? I'm not too sure, Shilian replied, then instantly turned to Hua Cheng. Sun Lang, Lang Ying is in the ghost city for sure, right? Hua Cheng also looked serious and only answered after a pause. He was, but whether he is still, that is hard to say. Gugu, why don't you verify further? Shilian thus continued his questions. Lord Rainmaster, you said that this white-clad young man had his head wrapped in bandages. Was he about 10 years of age, or maybe a bit older? Either way, a scrawny boy. Yet, unexpectedly, the Rainmaster replied, No, that young man was about 16 or 17, and his body type was close to that of your Highness. Huh? Now this was completely out of Shilian's expectations. 16, 17? Lang Ying isn't that old. So was it him? Based on the current information, nothing could be concluded. Pei Ming tossed that little medicinal bottle aside after he was done and said, Either way, we'll all end up at the kiln in the end, so let's just wait and see. He was a martial guard after all, and his recovery speed was exceptionally fast. With just a bottle of medicine, the severe wound was already pretty much healed. The Rainmaster inclined her head. Why doesn't General Pei have a sword? Pei Ming hadn't expected that she would actively ask him that question, and hadn't figured out how to best respond. On the side, Pei Su, who was finally conscious, answered while eating a roasted sweet potato. General, Pei's sword was snapped. When the Rainmaster heard this, she contemplated for a moment before removing her own sword and handed it to Pei Ming in both hands. There wasn't anything off about her expression, and both her words and actions were very well mannered. However, Pei Ming's face changed slightly, looking as if she was giving him a poisonous snake. After some hesitation, he said, Thanks, but this is the Rainmaster's sacred guardian sword. It's probably inappropriate, wielded in my hands. General Pei is a martial guard, a skilled swordsman, the Rainmaster said. Since we are here to prevent the birth of a new ghost king, then this sword would be more effective if wielded by you rather than me. Pei Ming hesitated for another good while, but in the end, still very politely declined. Pei thanks Queen Yushi for her kindness, but there's no need. Seeing this, the Rainmaster no longer pushed. The few of them then chatted for a bit, and the Rainmaster also inquired whether they had any news of the Windmaster. Only then did Shilian learn that the Rainmaster had also sent out a search, but it was fruitless, and he couldn't help but sigh. The group of them decided that they would rest for another 2 hours before continuing on their way. Shilian walked off for a bit and had wanted to just find a tree to lean against and lie down for a bit. But Hua Cheng dug out a bunch of ropes and cloth from who knows where and set up 2 swinging hammock beds between 2 trees. The 2 of them climbed in, and there was ample space, very comfortable to lie in. After lying for a bit, Xielin had his arms pillowing the back of his head, and he wondered aloud in confusion. San Lang, why won't General Pei take Lord Rainmaster's sword? A martial guard lost his weapon, but he's not anxious to find another one. Was he waiting to be beat? Hua Cheng also pillowed his arms behind his head and replied leisurely. Someone like Pei Ming, while he loves women, he might not think highly of women. Since he had to be saved, and it was by a woman, and one he knew in the past no less, he must be quite frustrated, thinking it's embarrassing. Plus, the Rainmaster disciplined his descendant before. Perhaps he felt that the Rainmaster was trying to make fun of him. How could he possibly take the sword? What nonsensical pride, Xielin commented. By the way, San Lang, did you see? There's an old scar on the Rainmaster's neck. I don't need to see to know, Hua Cheng said. She's the princess who slit her throat, after all. Xielin pulled himself up slightly. I knew it. Hua Cheng rose too. Did Gurga notice that the Rainmaster speaks slowly? That's also caused by the old scar on her neck. Ah, and here I thought it was because of her personality, Xielin said. As a princess, why did she have to slit her own throat? Xuanji's, have you forgotten how your queenship came to be, also makes one curious. How did her queenship come to be? It's a long story, but I'll make it short, Hua Cheng replied. It turns out, while Yuxi Huang certainly was of royal descent from the kingdom of Yuxi, first, she was a daughter, and second, she was born from a concubine of the lowest rank, so her status wasn't high. With her introverted personality and awkwardness, the 15 older brothers and sisters above, and the younger brothers and sisters below, each and every one of them were more in favor than her. The royal cultivation hall of the kingdom of Yuxi was a temple of Yulong. Throughout history, every ruler would select a royal descendant to go and cultivate, to pray for prosperity and peace, to express sincerity to the heavens. It sounded grand, but in truth, it was hard labor. The method of cultivation that the temple of Yulong practiced was hard labor. No servants or any item of comfort was permitted. And once there, they too had to do manual labor. In the past, this position was pushed around. Some would even spend an impressive fortune to find a replacement. However, when this generation came around, there was no selection process. Yuxi Huang was decided on from the get-go. No wonder Xuanji sounded like she didn't think highly of the Rainmaster, Xielin remarked. Of course, Hua Cheng said. Xuanji might not be a princess, but she also came from an impressive background with many suitors. She was much more valued in the eyes of royalty and nobility. Now that Xuanji had ruined herself like this, no wonder she couldn't stand the Rainmaster, who still planted fields so tranquilly. The Rainmaster urged her to let go, but in Xuanji's eyes, her words were probably seen as condescendingly sarcastic. Xielin shook his head. While they were both from a royal background and both entered the royal cultivation halls, the Rainmaster's experience was completely different from his. In any case, after that, the Rainmaster spent her days in peace and cultivation in the temple of Yulong, until one day a few esteemed guests came from the kingdom of of Shuli. Shuli and Yushi didn't immediately fall out. There was some forced civility and false courtesy at first. In order to maintain the bogus peace, the kingdom of Shuli sent a few royals, generals, and civil officials to attend the national banquet of the kingdom of Yushi and to pay a visit to Yushi's royal cultivation hall while they were at it. That day, Yushi Huang was cleaning the shingles on the roof of the temple, and when she was about to come down, she found that someone had taken the ladder away. The people at the bottom saw someone stuck on top of the roof, unable to come down, and all thought it to be funny. Even the princesses and princes of Yushi were snickering with their mouths covered. It was only a general of Shuli who, after chuckling, leapt up and brought her down. This general was of course Pei Ming. Just then, a voice spoke up suddenly. "That guy, Pei Ming, he's like that no matter where he goes, like a dog that needs to piss and mark his territory everywhere." Shilin was instantly pulled back to the present by that malicious and vulgar comparison. When he looked back, he picked up the unbelievably shrunken little sword. He said, "General Wrong, when did you break free of the mouth-sealing talisman? It seems you really want to talk." "Let this ancestor speak," Rongguang said. "I know every sordid affair Pei Ming has had. 3 days and 3 nights won't be enough to tell it all. He knew Shuli was going to invade Yushi, but he still went and seduced all the princesses who were in the most favor. They were all crazy for him, fighting each other jealously. Don't you think that's a little immoral?" It certainly wasn't nice. To smile and laugh with me yesterday, then invade and trample my home today. Shilian felt a little sorry. Did Queen Yushi and General Pei share a good relationship back then too? There was no relationship, Rongguang said. That guy, Pei Ming, has only ever met Yushi Huang twice. There were too many beauties in Yushi. He'd forgotten her the next day. In this world, it wasn't only women who fell out fast. Men fell out even faster, the only difference being the end result. When women fell out, it might be over after some slaps or scratching. But when men fell out, the end could very well be your death. When Shuli no longer wished to maintain a false peace, they made up some excuse to invade. Pei Ming led the army and charged all the way to the palace gates, forcing the king of Yushi at the time to hide deep within the palace, holding on to the very last line of defense. However, Pei Ming only needed to apply a bit of pressure, and he could crack that snail shell-like, delicate layer of protection that was the palace. But he didn't crush them so simply, and instead did something else under Rongguang's suggestion. The Shuli troops brought over hundreds of villains on death row from Yushi, dressed them up as normal civilians, and dragged them before the palace gates. Then he told King Yushi if he should come out himself and kowtow 3 times to show penance for oppressing his people and kill himself in atonement, then he would let those civilians go and not lay a single finger on any of the remaining members of the royal house. If he should refuse, Pei Ming would chop off those civilians' heads. He gave the royals 3 days' time, and every passing day in those 3, a new group would be killed. After 3 days passed, they would invade the palace to kill the royals, and then kill the rest of the civilians. General Rong, what a shrewd but beautiful move, Shilin remarked. Rongguang wasn't mad, and he was even pleased. I'll take that as a compliment. The reason Shuli used to invade Yushi became thus. The king of Yushi was negligent and oppressive in his rule, and out of justice, surely shall save and rescue the suffering Yushi people. A beautiful move. If King Yushi refused to come out, then he was selfish and didn't love his people. The awkward thing was, King Yushi had always publicized that he loved his people like his children. If his words and actions didn't match, it would for sure produce resentment in the people, thinking they'd been deceived. Didn't you say you loved your people like your children? Why would you turn around and have the civilians be sacrificed for the sake of royalty? This would then destroy their loyalty to the Yushi royalty. After killing that group of civilians, they could then announce that they were felons already on death row anyway, doomed to die, and they were only used to reveal the lies and selfishness of the Yushi royals. Such an immense contrast, it would surely calm the growing fears in the hearts of the Yushi people, which would make things so much easier for Shuli's subsequent takeover. However, if King Yushi really did come out and killed himself, whatever, there'd be no difference. It'd save them the hassle. Besides, they firmly believed that King Yushi would never come out to kill himself in atonement. Or rather, no monarch would be willing to end their life in humiliation. To bow before civilians and enemy troops, admit one's own mistakes, then go die? Dream on. Yet, unexpectedly, after only one day, just as Pei Ming was about to order for the execution of the first group of civilians, the ruler of Yushi actually did emerge. The palace gates opened. The monarch, with the sacred guardian sword Yulong hung at the waist, had walked out, kneeled before the people, and kowtowed 3 times. Then the sword was pulled, slashing their throat, splashing the gates with blood. Shilin could already guess what had happened. Was it Lord Rainmaster who had come out? It was, Ho Cheng replied. Later, it was only after thoroughly interrogating the palace attendants and others of royal descent that they found out what had happened. Pei Ming and Guan and the other soldiers were yelling outside the palace, pacing back and forth, laughing non-stop, exceedingly arrogant. Within the palace, on the other hand, it was utter chaos. Crying and wailing filled the air. There was naturally no way King Yushi would go out to kill himself, and he sat upon his throne, his face grim and pale. Meanwhile, after all the brothers and sisters, who usually fought each other so hard to gain favors, howled and wailed for so long, when they still didn't see the king move a muscle, they each began to very carefully try to persuade him. There were all kinds of reasons. Like, this is good for the people. Even if you die, your name will go down in history. If this keeps up, the people are doomed. Everything came out. Yet, nothing worked, and soon a day was going to pass. Some of the sons were growing anxious, and they roared at their father in their agitated state. The king hadn't even died yet, and he was instantly outraged, swinging his staff out to beat them. If this was before, then the sons and grandsons would surely never retaliate. But now that they were in a critical state, no one cared. Thus, one of the princes couldn't endure it and fought back. Yet that punch was too powerful, knocking the 60-some-years-old king down, his head covered with blood, unable to get back up. The group of princes and princesses were stupefied at first, but soon after, they realized that they were still angry. They restarted the discussion on how to drag the unconscious king out, and then how to complete the difficult request of kowtowing and atoning. Even ridiculous ideas, like hanging him like a stringed puppet to control him, were part of the heated discussion, and the king's eyes reddened from rage as he listened. Finally, they then decided that they'd find 2 people to carry the old king out to complete the atonement. However, now there was a new problem. Who should those 2 people be? It was a dangerous position to be in. Who knew if that Pei Ming would just shoot an arrow and kill them all dead if he wasn't happy? The disputes and arguments went on and on and on. Suddenly, the 16th princess, who had always stood there silently and unnoticeably, said something to the old king who was lying on the ground. Yushi Huang said, "Please, pass the throne to me." King Yushi gazed at this daughter that he had barely looked at in all his life, and from the corner of his eye, a crummy drop of a tear finally rolled down. However, it was only the one drop. Thus, in less than an hour, in the crudest and most rushed succession ceremony in the history of the kingdom of Yushi, the monarch who was the least likely to become queen was born. The new queen of Yushi slit her own throat, and blood poured like a fountain, no doubt beyond saving. Pei Ming had never thought that things would progress like this, and he was completely stunned at the time. Guan cursed loudly, yelling, how did things turn out like this? How could they do this? To have someone insignificant die, not only could they not destroy the people's loyalty, they couldn't kill the old crook either. Although even the soldiers of Shuli couldn't bear to watch anymore and rushed to save the queen, in the end, her injury was too great, and the medical officials all said that she couldn't be saved. Thus, in the end, they could only keep their promise and not touch the civilians, nor temporarily lay fingers on the royalty. They sent this monarch to the temple of Yulong to have her breathe her last before burying her in the royal mausoleum at the temple of Yulong. Yet no one had imagined that very night, in that moment when Yushi Huang took her last breath, the divine statue of the Rainmaster over her head sighed. Thunder roared and lightning crackled. The new Rainmaster had ascended. Shirin mused. No wonder General Pei looked like that when he saw that sword.